Hey guys, this is Admiral Seabass. Hope you all had a Merry Christmas and are going to have a happy holiday season here heading into the new year. I just wanted to do a brief update on Global War 85. It's been a while since I posted anything or given you an update. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First is, you know, the pandemic has slowed down playtesting. I was supposed to do a playtest of this in Tulsa on December 4th and 5th, but that fell through because of travel schedules, which were severely limited because of the pandemic. Um, and I just haven't been able to get the rest of my playtest group together again either to do another playtest. So I've been slowly testing the escalation concept, and that's been evolving. If you remember, if you've been following my videos, we did a playtest on October 17th, and the biggest feedback we got was escalation, that it just didn't seem organic, and it didn't seem like the guys had enough options to escalate things as in that pre-war period as we're building to DEFCON 1, that the guys wanted more options based on what was happening on the board. And so we sketched out an initial escalation concept and tested that in early November. And then we've tweaked that even more now moving forward. And I've also been inspired by the work that Bob's doing on the Global War 1914 game and his prequel. And so what I've done is I've taken his prequel rules for 1914 and I've fit them for 1985 and combined them with random events to chart a path to war in this game that feels natural and feels organic and feels 1980s. And that will also be different each time you play the game, and will introduce a variety of paths to war in this particular game. And so I just wanted to give you an overview of what I've done. Now, I don't have the whole board set up here. You can see I have almost nothing because I just wanted to test the concept. And really, I've been doing some random events and then just making some assumptions about things that happen in terms of diplomacy and insurgencies, etc. And then just saying, hey, does it feel right that war would break out based on where the board is now and where people are now? And so I wanted to show that to you. So the game still starts the same way, with everybody at DEFCON 5. Iran and Iraq are at war at the start of the game. South Africa and Angola are at war. And you've got some insurgencies in Afghanistan, etc. So what I did, I just wanted to test the new escalation concept and say, hey, what would it take? Let's say that the Soviets did about as well as they could possibly do across the globe, and let's see where things stand based on the Soviets basically making every die roll, getting every diplomacy roll, every insurgency roll, Iraq doing about as well as it could possibly be expected, and then let's pause and say, let's look at where the board is, and would it make sense that the U.S. or NATO would now declare war on the Soviets and go to war. And that's what I've done. And so now what happens is basically at DEFCON 5, everybody starts with a limited number of IPPs. I think it's 6 IPPs is where I have it now. And you can only use those IPPs to do things like start insurgencies, give military aid to someone, tech rolls, those types of things. You can't buy units yet when you start the game, and the 6 IPPs could change, obviously. So what happened is on turn 1, I introduced some random events, and on turn 1, basically, one more thing I did. Basically, I wanted to give China more money for them to be able to do more stuff in the game. So I basically made it so only they can sell arms in this game and make money, and they can save that money essentially until war breaks out, and then they've got a nice pile of cash that they can use to buy some stuff to start the game. So I did that too. So on on turn 1 with everyone at DEFCON 5, I did 2 random events, and I have random events for DEFCON 5, 4, 3, and 2, and they escalate right in their severity and importance. So at DEFCON 5, the first random event I rolled was that Beijing gets to host a Summer Olympics, and that would increase their IPP by 2 permanently. And then another one that I rolled was Chernobyl, and that immediately caused nuclear fallout damage in USSR, which the USSR had to deal with. So those were the random events that I did at the start of the game. And then from there, basically just tried to say, could the Soviets, how well could the Soviets do if they made everything from there? And so, like, I think I had them win the insurgency in El Salvador on turn one and flip that to Soviet. I also had them crush the U.S. backed insurgents in Nicaragua on turn one and flip that to Soviet. I think I also had them crush the Mujahideen insurgency in Afghanistan on turn one, and also the Lebanese government insurgents on turn one. And so immediately, right off the bat, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Nicaragua, and El Salvador all flipping to the Soviets on turn one. And yeah, and then had the Chinese also start to get down here into Southeast Asia as well with insurgencies also. I had the Soviets focus exclusively on Saudi Arabia for diplomacy, and assuming they were making their diplomacy roles and the U.S. was missing their diplomacy roles. Same thing up here in Yugoslavia, that the Warsaw Pact would be making those diplomacy roles and NATO would be missing those. And so, yeah, that's kind of how things progressed. And then on turn two, I rolled a couple of random events. And the first one was a Kurdish revolt in eastern Turkey, which flipped Anatolia to Soviet. And then also, and these were truly random rolls, they just happened to benefit the Soviets. Algeria went from pro-USSR to aligned to the USSR as well, right? Given the Soviets a foothold there in northern Africa. And then based on what happened on the first turn with Afghanistan and the Central American countries and Lebanon all going to the Soviets, I went ahead and moved the U.S. to DEFCON 2, and the U.S. only to DEFCON 2, because they wouldn't have been happy at all of that, and especially in Central America where they have victory points for keeping the Soviets out. So the U.S. went to DEFCON 2, and that meant that the U.S. could now mobilize their expeditionary forces, and they could do surgical strikes against a minor faction. And so they used their surgical strikes. They brought some naval, they brought this task force up, had some naval strike fighters on it, and they used it to hit some Iraqi forces here that were moving into Iran. And that was another factor that pushed U.S. DEFCON up, was that Iraq took an oil-producing territory right there. And then the U.S. could mobilize their expeditionary forces and place those in an ally overseas, and so they moved those into Iran as well. By the way, I forgot to mention, one thing I've changed is we went ahead and gave Iran to the U.S. Iran was also allied to the U.S. Somewhat in the 80s. In Cold War terms, they were allied to the U.S. and China. I used to give Iran control to China, but China just didn't have enough money to do anything with them, so I went ahead and gave them to the U.S. And at DEFCON 2, the U.S. was able to move some of their expeditionary forces, like these airborne infantry, into Iran to guard Iran from Iraqi takeover. All right. So the problem is that the Soviets kept pushing on turn two, and they were able to flip Argentina and get another insurgency started in northern part of South America. So that went ahead and moved the U.S. to DEFCON 3 for turn two, because their bellicosity was going up even more. So on DEFCON 3, the random events that I rolled were Eastern African War, where Ethiopia, which is allied, or which is leans Soviet, invaded the Somali Republic, which leans to the U.S., and actually defeated them and flipped both of those territories became Soviet. And then the other random event I rolled was civilians murdered in Congo, which the UN here with this UN marker took note of that, and with a UN marker in there now, it's a race between the major factions to invade and put down the government of Congo, and whoever does that first will get some political capital points. And it looks like the Russians or the Warsaw Pact are going to be able to do that because of this Warsaw Pact airborne infantry, which is mobilized into Angola on the next turn, they could probably go in here into Congo, put that down, and get some political capital points from since the UN passed some kind of resolution condemning that. So that was the other random event. And then on turn three, the Soviets continued to push. And on turn three, they flipped the Saudi Arabia their way, converting another oil territory. The U.S. could now do some additional things at DEFCON 3. They could call up all of their reserves, and they could place in any original territory. Um, uh, they could place them in any original territory, which they chose to call up their reserves to Guam to get them closer to the Middle East theater here. Um, and so they did that. They could now also declare war on a minor power, which they did in Iraq. They declared war on Iraq and were able to now attack Iraq fully, not just surgical strikes. Um, so then turn three kind of went as you would expect. The Soviets continued to ratchet things up. They actually flipped another territory in South America. Warsaw Pact flipped Yugoslavia their way. Things just continued to degrade. The only thing that I couldn't really do is that Angola has a tough time down here against South Africa, so they couldn't really make any headway there. Though were able to take southwestern Africa from them. And so all of that meant that the U.S. was now pushed up to DEFCON 2. And at DEFCON 2, the options we're thinking about are limited war. So the U.S. can actually declare limited war against another major faction, but it's limited to a particular theater, in this case the Middle East. So the U.S. could attack the Soviet units in the Middle East, but nowhere else. Also, at DEFCON 2, we're going to let the U.S. start moving all of its troops overseas so they could start reinforcing Western Europe as well. And so then on turn 4, for the DEFCON 2 random events, I rolled it, and it was North Korea invades South Korea. And that basically means at that point that general war is going to break out. And if you look at the board, now remember I said I wanted to test this to see, does it make sense now that the U.S. would want to go to war with the Soviet Union? And I think you can see here with the Iraqis and the Soviets basically overrunning the Middle East and all the oil territories, with Central America, Soviet a Soviet presence in Central America, and also South America. I think it makes sense now that we could imagine that the U.S. would want to declare war on the Soviet Union and stop their expansion, especially with the North invading the South now in Korea. And so I think if we were playing this game, we could look at this board at this point and say, yeah, it makes sense that the U.S. would want to attack the Soviets now and push back against them. Things are getting out of control here globally. The U.S. would want to use their nuclear forces and their general conventional forces to start pushing back directly into the Soviet Union as a way to get them less focused on expansion across the globe here. And I think we would just get comfortable with war breaking out now globally, right? Because the thing about this game is that, war never broke out globally in the 80s. So we want you to feel like it makes sense. Based on where we were in 1985 historically, how could we get to war breaking out globally? And if you look at a situation like this with the Chinese and the Soviets increasing their presence across the globe, I think you would get more comfortable saying, yeah, historically speaking, that makes sense. I could see the U.S. leadership now saying we've got to push back. We've got to go to war. Because if we don't, the global chessboard is going to be reorganized in a way that's going to limit the U.S.'s power and ability to exert its power across the globe in support of its allies. All right? So where we go from here is I've got to continue testing this, right? I want to do the flip side. I want to show that it could go just as well for the U.S. as it possibly could, and that the Soviets would want to declare general war against the U.S. So I've got to do that, and then I've got to tweak the system, and then really need to get my playtest group back together to test it. But I think it's going to take really the pandemic to slow down or to recede in order for us to do that again. So anyway, I hope you guys are well. Miss all of you. Miss talking to you. I hope you enjoyed this, and it gives you some sense for where we're going. Would love your feedback and comments. Again, this is very early concept phase for this specific escalation system. It is roughly based on Bob's 1914 system, which he calls the prequel, and I really like it so far. I think it's going to really help. It's going to introduce some variability into the game, make it more fun for you to get work going. All right, guys, take care. Admiral Seabass signing off.